The Midnight Library is a book about Nora C., a woman in her 30s who's very dissatisfied with her own life. After a especially terrible day, where everything seems to fall apart, she decides to die. While in the limbo between life and death, she goes to the Midnight Library, a place where she can access other versions of her life. Lives where she had made different decisions, chosen different paths. The story follows her as she travels between the alternative realities, trying to fix her regrets, expecting to find a life where she is happy and fulfilled, just to realize that it's not that simple. I'm not going to go into examples so that I don't spoil the whole book, but basically, her different decisions didn't result in the outcome she was expecting. I didn't dislike this book, neither did I think it was bad, but after finishing it, I didn't think about it at all. And why is that? Well, the main reason is the writing has absolutely no thematic subtext. Both the prose and the premise are not subtle with its messaging. Characters are constantly telling you what to think. And if that wasn't enough, by the end of the book, it literally spells out the message for you, just in case you didn't get it. So of course I didn't think about it. What is there to think? There wasn't anything to digest, to interpret and come to my own conclusions. It was all spelled out for me. At no point I had to think. That's why subtext is so important. By not explicitly telling your reader every single thing about your story, you're inviting them to engage with your text in a deeper level. You're showing them that you trust their intelligence, their capability of picking up on things without you having to flat out tell them. And not only that, it will also make your book much more realistic. In real life, things are rarely obvious. People don't say exactly what they're thinking. There is no narrator explaining everything to you. So, let's talk a little about subtext, shall we? What even is subtext? It's everything that's left unspoken. The underlying emotions, motives, and silent thoughts that give depth to your characters and plot. For example, character A offers character B a mint, and they refuse. Character A then proceeds to be uncharacteristically pushy, saying that it's from an expensive brand and it tastes really good and that they should just take one. The text is just that. One character really wants to give their friend a mint. Now, the subtext we can gather from that is that character B probably has bad breath. You could just have character A say, "You have bad breath, have a mint," but what's the fun in that? This is just a silly example, but you can apply this logic to most things in your story. Thinking, how can you make this more interesting? How can you communicate this idea in a different way than the most obvious one? One of the most prevalent ways subtext will shine is through dialogue. Because like real people, characters will have their own goals, needs, expectations, and all of that will come into play when they decide what to speak and what to leave unspoken. For example, your character might be thinking about breaking up with their partner, but instead of telling them, they start acting more distant, less affectionately, because they're too cowardly to actually rip off the band-aid. And maybe the partner understands what's going on, but they're in such a bad place mentally that they just do their best to ignore it and pretend everything is fine, in hopes that things will get better with time. So both know that things are not good between them, but neither of them mentions it. And if you're writing this scene, you might feel tempted to explain all of that in the prose, but maybe don't, especially if it's not your main plot. This kind of subtlety can add so much depth to your story, having your reader come to that conclusion by themselves just by the hints you give them. However, I think it's important for me to say, maybe you do want to tell your audience exactly what's going on, and that's not a problem at all. You just have to think why you're doing that and if it will benefit the narrative. And a lot of times, it will. That's when your judgment as a writer comes in. You have to think, what will work better in that scene? Subtlety or clarity? This also applies to the overall messaging of your story. It's good to think about how explicit you want to make it. Normally, the younger your audience is, the more obvious you have to be about your themes. But if you're writing for adults, you can get away with requiring them to stop and think for a little. With all of that said, how do you actually write subtext? Well, there are countless ways you could do it, but I'll go over a few examples. First, and most obviously, avoid having your characters flat out state how they're feeling. If your protagonist is angry, don't write down they were infuriated. Describe their body language. Show how their nostrils flared, how they clenched their fists. And for dialogue, instead of saying, I'm angry at you, I didn't want to see you today, they could use a more subtle, why are you here? With the right descriptions of tone and body language, this will communicate the message just as well. Another thing to consider is exposing your character's relationships. You could just say the boss is having an affair with the secretary, but instead of doing that, you can have the secretary lightly graze their shoulder after bringing them coffee, as the boss discreetly smiles at them. In the same way, you can hint at someone being in love. Show how they're always making conversation with that one particular person and how they always laugh at their jokes even if they're not funny at all. You can use contradictions to show that things are not as simple as the words being spoken. Someone might insist that they're fine, but they always spend too long in the bathroom and come out with their eyes swollen and a stuffy nose. Or someone who says they love their spouse but is constantly mistreating them. Your character's traits can also be shown this way. Instead of saying they're insecure, hint at it by having them putting others down and doing their best to hide their own flaws. You can also enhance your plot through subtext by, for example, revealing information with unspoken further implications, like having a character be completely shocked after meeting their friend's partner for the first time for no apparent reason. Then, in a future chapter, reveal how that wasn't the first time they've met, that years ago the character actually killed them and disposed of their body, or so they thought. On a final note, don't let your writing be stilted by the constant concern of writing between the lines. Don't worry too much about it in the first draft. You can always add it later after you already have the story laid out for you. In conclusion, subtext is very important to give your story more depth, to make it more nuanced, but despite of all that, the Midnight Library was still a huge success, even after going for clarity over subtlety in almost every single way. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, take this whole video with a grain of salt. Anyway, this is it for this video. If it helped you somehow, please leave a like and consider subscribing. You can watch my other videos about writing. I have a whole playlist in case you're interested. Thanks for watching!